Right, so good afternoon. I have with me today Natalie Whiston. Natalie is an upcoming author, reviewer, and all-round lovely person. Is this fair? Yes. First question, which is a question I ask of a lot of people. Natalie, which genre do you write in, and how do you define that genre?
Well, I do tend to stick to two different genres, which is extreme horror and dark fantasy. My latest one, novel that I'm hoping to get out this year, is dark fantasy / extreme horror / occult, because it looks into different religions as well. So I had to do a lot of research into the Quran. I had to do a lot of research into the Torah. I had to do some research into the New and the Old Testament. And a lot of horror it's variated in subgenres. Yeah. So you'll have extreme horror, you'll have splatterpunk that comes into that. Sometimes you have like a more mellow version of horror, like your haunted houses, your ghost stories. But there's not really a specific genre when it comes to horror, because there's so many subgenres underneath it. There's many different ways that you can take a story. So I tend to stick to extreme these days because that seems to be my bread and butter.
What classifies a horror story as being extreme horror then? What would I expect to find?
If you're going extreme horror, expect that some authors have started doing it now, because Amazon has taken off a lot of extreme horror off Amazon due to trigger warnings. So you'll find a page at the very start of the story that has trigger warnings, whether it's anything to do with incest, rape, bestiality, if it's anything like abuse, child abuse, if it's going into topics that are looked into these days, such as human trafficking, it's anything that would make you as a person uncomfortable, but also has an element of realism to it. For example, Daniel Volpe with Talia looks into the world of pornography, young girls being forced into the industry when they aren't given the choice because of money, because they've moved out, they've cut connections with family, people who prey on these kind of girls to get into the situation. It's a very hard kicking kind of story. However, there is a scene in the book where Talia's friend is attacked in her apartment, like sexually attacked, but Danny doesn't go all out. Right. He doesn't go gratuitous with it. He gives it the right amount of, I mean, as a person who survived an abusive relationship, it can trigger you. But for Danny, he did it just perfectly right, that he didn't oversell it, so to speak. You have a lot of people like with films such as I Spit on Your Grave, which is basically going into like grindhouse kind of situations. Some people do grindhouse style stuff, like my brain has stopped working.
Those people, yes, yeah.
But yeah, it goes into like the categories of the 80s, where you had sex being a main thing, where you had race being a main thing in the storyline. Splatterpunk in itself is gore, extreme, and it's not for the faint-hearted. So if you want to pick up an extreme horror book, I recommend you read the trigger warnings beforehand, because some people, they'll say, I like extreme horror, but I can't do this, this, and this. So with extreme horror, it gives you boundaries. So like with us as reviewers, we do put trigger warnings on our reviews and say, right, I will warn you, this includes this, 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 and this. If you want to stay away from it, go ahead. But if you're more interested in the storyline, then I recommend this story, because it's more tame than what that one is.
I'm with you. And I think trigger warnings are helpful, but to my mind, there's also that level of the trigger warning is telling me what I'm actually going to receive. And I do like to be surprised. But yeah, I suppose with extreme horror, it's not so much about being surprised, really, is it? In a good way. Yeah, I also want to ask you then. So yeah, thank you so much for what you said about extreme horror there. What's dark fantasy then? What's the difference between fantasy and dark fantasy?
Fantasy is something like Harry Potter, anything that's kind of more tame. Dark fantasy and urban fantasy, they tend to combine real world aspects with fantasy. So,
Right.
for example, in my story, Death Walks with You, you do explore the fantasy elements of dimensional, different dimensions, which is a bit sciencey, but obviously with science fiction, that's my no-go. I can't do science fiction. With dark fantasy, you're delving into fantasy, but you're adding darker elements to it. Maybe you're adding an element of horror to it, an element of suspense. You're giving a bit more than what you would for magical fairies and everything is fine. The story won't always end happy in dark fantasy. And urban fantasy takes more real life aspects, reality, like this time frame, but with elves and dragons and whatever. So it's however you want to perceive it, but not everyone has the same vision of what fantasy, horror, dark fantasy, urban fantasy is. So it is all up to your perception of what you believe you want in a story.
Excellent. What is your writing schedule?
Obviously I'm going through a bit of a life crisis. That's magical. But when I can get chance to write, it is usually straight after work, or if I do have brainstorms in between, like for example lunchtimes, I do a sprint.
Yeah.
A sprint is like you can do it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour, depending on your schedule. I find sprints are the best way to get your mind working and to get ideas flowing. Once you've got it on paper and you have an idea all mapped out, even if it doesn't make sense and it's not quite like planned out correctly, you can always take that as a blueprint to make your story.
Absolutely. I used to have an incredibly tedious office job, and one of the things that I started doing was I would take a notepad with me for my lunch break, and then I would, on my lunch break, there was a cemetery nearby, and I would go and sit in the cemetery and write whilst I was there, just because it was lovely and quiet. You don't get kids running around playing football or anything. It was quite pleasant to look at, really. My wife said, "This is really kind of creepy. You're going to a cemetery to write on a lunchtime." I said, "I'm going there with a notepad and pen, not a condom and a shovel. So yeah, it's not creepy." But yeah, doing it at lunchtime, yeah, brilliant. But yeah, when you get back home from work as well, I think is a fantastic time to do it. Yeah, it's a great way to unwind, and it's a great way to use all the things that we've sort of like collected from people throughout the day.
Yeah, exactly. Like sensory kind of things. Like you may have noticed something throughout the day and you may have a feeling or a sensation or an idea that matches that. You can put that on pen and paper and then take it home with you and go, oh, I felt this earlier on and I was thinking about this particular situation. And you can map it together to make a brainstorm from your sprint to set out planning of your idea.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things as writers. We never take a moment off, do we? You sat there watching a film and thinking, oh, well, if they'd done this, this, and this, that would be a much better film. And yeah, there's never a dull moment. Which is more important for you, plot or character?
See, it all depends on the situation. Sometimes the plot comes to me before the character comes to me. And sometimes, like with the book, the characters were formed before the plot. I had an idea where I wanted to do the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, but I didn't want it in a certain way that everybody else has done it. For example, I watched Supernatural and I saw their version of the Four Horsemen and I sat there and thought, that character doesn't seem right to me. That's not how I vision war. That's not how I see war in my mind. So I ended up just sitting there and I made a personality setup for Lagarafia. What I wanted out of war, what was missing from their war. Then I watched Good Omens and I saw a little bit of my war in her. And I started mapping out the character and what she needed to kind of be better than that. It sounds really, really bad, doesn't it? When you're watching something, you go, no, I don't like that version. I can make a better version. And I ended up coming up with 4 separate characters that became my main set for my plot. I had the plot, which was, I knew I wanted the apocalypse. I had my 4 characters. My characters told me where to go from there, by their personality traits, by their actions. I found that at one point, my characters actually led one of my scenes. For example, there is a relationship between 2 of my characters, Viola and Anna, and I never expected it to go the way that it did. But as the story progressed and I started doing the steps for the chapter, I realized that there was a stronger connection between the 2. When I went back to my character setup, I went, oh, they're lovers. Great. It's just, sometimes the characters will tell you exactly what you want, because you'll know in your head, this is how this person will react. This is how they're programmed. This is their weakness and this is their strength. So characters for me are important, more so than the plot.
But it's almost as though you're describing, and this is not meant to sound offensive in any way, but it's almost as though you're describing a mental health problem where we're there. And it's not just you, I do it myself, that's sort of like, oh, the characters have said this to me. And what I'm really saying is these imaginary people inside my head have decided on this thing. Yeah, it's bizarre the way we like compartmentalize ourselves from our characters. But yeah, I get what you're saying exactly there. And yeah, it's sometimes so hard to differentiate between plot or character. What piece of writing advice would you give to anybody who's just starting out?
Definitely for me, it was networking. If you really, really want to get into the horror community or the fantasy community, it's all about putting yourself out there. A friend once told me that you're not just selling your story, you're selling yourself. So it is important that you network. It's important that you get to know people, you make a conversation, you get to find these groups that will help you to get better, will help you with marketing. They'll point you in the right direction of webinars. They'll point you in the direction of YouTube videos. Having a community around you makes it so much easier to get in. And the other thing I say is don't focus on paid calls. I know it sounds bad, but when you're starting out, you want to get noticed.
Yeah.
So if you go for submission calls like I did, that was how I started. I went with Black Ink and Raven and Drake. I started subbing for Drabbles just to kind of get noticed. Once I was comfortable with Drabbles, I then moved on to stories, and I started doing building myself up in the community. So from Drabbles to 500-word stories, and then finally I did my short story. By this point, I'd marketed enough myself as a reviewer. I'd marketed myself in the community and helped others as well. Like I help with the admin group for Get Writing Horror. I do the sprint group and the review group. I contributed, and I think that's a big thing for me. Networking, contributing to the community will get you noticed. It will also make you feel like you're part of a new family, essentially. I feel like Get Writing Horror became a new family to me, as well as the Godless family. I mean, Marina and Ash have basically made me their new child. So, but yeah, communication, networking. If you can find somebody who's already in there, like for example, me, if you want to approach me, I'm friendly. I'm insane, but I'm friendly. You want to approach me and ask me which group is best for you. You want to go for advice about how to start, how to get set up. I'm an easy person to track down, as bad as that sounds.
There will be links below anyway if you want to track that down. So yeah, no, thank you for that. And yeah, I actually agree that networking is wonderful, especially if one of the things with teaching is you find that you can sort of like learn things, but you learn things more effectively when you're actually teaching them. And it's the same when you're giving people advice. When somebody sort of like said, how do I do this or where do I do that? You take, because you want to be honest in the way that you're answering, you give them so much feedback that it's reinforcing it for you, isn't it? So
Yeah,
if somebody's
exactly.
asking you how a story should be structured, you're thinking, how the fuck should a story be? Oh yes, and yeah, it's yeah. So who do you read for pleasure?
Clive Barker, Dave Jeffrey, Daniel Volpe. I've kind of got a list now. I've recently got into Raina Havoc, who is also, most of these authors you can find on Godlet. Todd Love, Aaron Bogart. I can never say his last name, Aaron. I'm so sorry. You know, the Written in Red crew are the best crew as well. If you can find them on YouTube, they have some amazing writing advice as well. So if you're interested in going the extreme horror route, I recommend that YouTube channel.
Definitely.
Now, if you are interested, it's all right. I've got notes of connections that can help. So like, for example, if you go to a YouTube called 20 Books to 50K, that will help with marketing. I found a lot of really great hints on keeping an eye on sales for when my books do go out, keeping an eye on how to make my marketing better. There's also the Alexandra Tor webinar, which really helped me to set up my plan for marketing the book, you know, and setting my goals for what I want this year, and realizing that I want to publish my book this year. I want to collaborate more with authors this year. And it's got me into a bit of a rabbit hole that I can't get out of. So most of my authors that I love are people I work with. But my main author for inspiration is Clive Barker. I also love Neil Gaiman. I do like my fantasy elements as well. I do strive more towards the horror aspect though. Like, for example, Clive Barker, Stephen King. I just tend to sway more towards horror when I'm like needing a day off. However, Dave Jeffrey has just become, honestly, I never thought I'd love a new horror author. I'd be like, Clive Barker and nothing else. But Dave Jeffrey's dystopian series, the A Quiet Apocalypse series, is masterfully done. And every single book that he has written, I have been screaming obscenities like mad at the ending, because that man knows how to do a twist. And I love a twist at the end of a story, because I do anyway. But yeah, Jeffrey really pulled me into dystopian horror in a very different way, because I was never really interested in post-apocalyptic horror or reading that for pleasure.
Yeah.
He changed my mind. I think that's the main thing about being an author. That will definitely rope into the next one, which would be later on literary success. I'll explain that later.
But yeah, I mean, 20 Books to 50K, I think they've got a Facebook page as well as the YouTube stuff. Godless is definitely a resource worth checking out. And yeah, I love the fact that you are so immersed in horror. You are a go-to person when I need to pick somebody's brains about horror. Yes, and I will do. Right, so you've collaborated. Did you know I've got a PhD? It's not in creative.
Hey, it's more than me.
Collaborated. You've collaborated on a couple of projects with Ash Ericmore. What's the secret to successful collaboration, and how does collaboration differ from solitary writing?
Well, solitary writing, you're thinking about your own plan. So it's all basically how your timeline works, how your planning works. When you're collaborating with somebody else, you have to take them into account. So for us, it was teamwork. I think the main thing for us was scheduling and planning as well. So we had an idea, and then we spoke to each other practically every day. We got to know each other quite well, and we communicated every day about how we were going to do it. It's like with us, it was chapter by chapter. So he took first chapter, I took second chapter, third, and it went on like that until the end, where I took the last chapter. So he took the first, I took the 10th. We went from there, planning our schedules throughout the day. Then it was talking about how we wanted to market this, who we'd go to, what he felt was the best format for it, how I felt about that format, signing a contract together. Always, if you're collaborating, I will say this, even if you're really close to the author, like me and him, I have nothing but trust and love. But if you're working with an author that you don't know, always get references, because I've been down that rabbit hole before where I've met somebody who wanted to collaborate with me and they had no writing experience, no references from the community. Nobody knew who they were. And they were literally a marketing scammer. That does happen. So be very careful when you're collaborating. Always make sure that you know the person's work, read the person's work, you understand them. I understand Ash's work because I love Ash and I've read his work 20 times a day. So I also say, if you're going to collaborate with someone, read their work, understand them and how it can mold in with yours.
Is there any danger that with collaborating with someone, why are words so difficult for me today? When you're collaborating with someone, is there a chance that it could sort of like stifle your creativity, that you're only producing half a story?
Not really. I mean, we're both kind of melded into each other and we both combined our writing styles. Like you can tell Ash's style from my chapter, definitely. Ash, God bless him, because my grammar and everything, I have cognitive issues when it comes to grammar. I know in my head what the grammar should look like, but my brain does not quite communicate with the rest of me. So I have issues with past, present tense, that kind of thing. So Ash did the grammar changes, but everything stayed as it was. He didn't change any wording. He didn't change the flow of it. It was still me. It's just punctuation got walked around a bit. But that was the thing. We both read each other's chapters. We kept each other's souls in their chapters because that's what makes the writer. It's your own personality into your own chapter. And you'll definitely tell, especially with your move, you will definitely tell the difference between Ash's character and my character, because even regardless of the fact they're different genders, for starters, they're different personalities to another degree as well. And the way they speak and the way that it's written is totally different to Ash's stuff. So both of us managed to keep our individuality in it. If you are going to collaborate with somebody, make sure that, like I did kind of take over a bit, but I rein myself in every so often and go, look, let Ash do this bit, explain, like blah, blah, blah. It was quite sweet when he put on his newsletter that I was the driving force of the whole project. And I was just like, but he worked damn hard as much as I did. So I'll never take credit for all that book. It is, he was amazing to work with. But you have to be careful that you don't stifle your creativity. So if another author tries to go, oh, well, you know, this is rubbish, throw it out, I don't want to. You got to keep to your own self. Be true to yourself when you're writing.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, don't panic. Collaborations don't always work, especially if you have two very dominant personalities. If you've got one submissive personality and one dominant, then obviously the whole book will be taken over by that one person. You've just got to kind of stand your ground and go, look, this is how I'm going to write this. Are you okay with it? They say yes. They say no. Be diplomatic. Talk about it. What don't they like about it? What don't they like about the character? What do they think needs changing? How would they approach it? It's all about communication in a collaboration, but also staying true to you as your writing skill and sticking to it.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like it's going to work differently for different people. I've collaborated with somebody once in the past, and I would possibly do it again in the future. But I also like the autonomy and the control of, do you know what, I've had this idea and I can work on this, and I can leave it, and this is going to sound really selfish, but I can leave it at the end to surprise my first readers with, and this is what's happening. And yeah, I would worry about not having that surprise there. But yeah, that's just me. I like surprising people. So aside from writing, you also review a lot of fiction. Do you think that reading and reviewing help to strengthen your own writing? And if so, how does it have a positive impact?
I will definitely say that it helps. Reading other people's work gives me that insight into what I'm missing. Like, for example, when I was reading Lee's work, Lee Andrew. He as far as multiple visions are concerned, I know I struggle with that, because I will start from one character's perspective and not think about completing the whole journey. So when I read his work, I was like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it. You go one person, you stick to that, and then if you're in a different person in a different chapter, you stick to that person, their feelings, their emotions. It taught me how to blend my work better, because obviously you've got first person, third person, you've got working from multiple perspectives. Like, for example, in the book, one perspective is Anna, next chapter is a perspective from Casca, next perception is from Anna again. Then you've got Asmodeus as well, who is very self-involved and is a different character trait altogether. So I had to think very differently for him. Lee's work really did show me what I was missing. Again, Daniel Volpe, a brilliant writer. He taught me a lot with the extreme horror and what I was looking for in shock value, how to structure a story, how to make the build-up last. Reviewing has given me such an amazing insight into different stories, as well as I found multiple books like the Horror Writers Society, for example, have got their own guide to writing book, which comes from various different authors and their approach on writing. Like Ramsey Campbell's in there, and he talks about how to overthrow tropes, make it your own. That was great for me. Then I've got Mark My Words, which is absolutely brilliant for anyone who wants to start in writing, because it will give you an idea of how to submit if you want to go for submission calls, how to approach and format with Shun. It's great. I mean, I'm not just reviewing books, I'm reviewing poetry, I'm reviewing guides. It's giving me more knowledge and insight into what I need to improve on my writing. And I think as a writer, you are always constantly learning and constantly evolving. So for me, if I looked back at what I was before the reviews and the reading, I would say 100% I am better now than when I was. I was so quiet, really reserved. I had no confidence in my writing or my ideas. But as soon as I joined the community, as soon as I started reviewing, I started reading more, started evolving into reading into between the lines of each story and seeing, okay, that structure work. Okay, that plot work. What if I did this with my story? I started to see where my mistakes were in my original work and learning from it.
And yeah, I think that learning process is such an important thing, and sometimes it's kind of difficult as well. I've got to admit, I will go back to work and or I used to, certainly in my earlier days of writing, and it's just easier to abandon something rather than think, you were really shit then, Lester. You mentioned Mark My Words as a way of formatting for submission, and yeah, this is going slightly off script, but can you explain how important it is that submissions are formatted correctly?
It's all about presentation as well. I found that if in my earlier days, when I didn't know about Shun, when I didn't know about how to format, how to indent, how to present my work, the editor literally just went, no, tossed it. Yeah. You will get rejected so much if you do not stick to the format. So always read the submission guidelines. If you don't stick to those submission guidelines, no matter how good your story is, it could be Stephen King worthy. That editor will look at that and go, they haven't even bothered to read the submission lines, and they will toss it regardless. And that'll make you feel bad, because you'll feel like, well, my story wasn't good enough. Really, it could have been a really amazing story. You just didn't format it properly. If you format something properly and to the guidance that is given to you by the publisher, you'll get further. Because at least then, even if it makes the slush pile, you know that you've got that far because you did what you were supposed to do with the formatting. You made it easier for the editor. I remember, I think it was Angela Yuriko Smith. She was saying in the book, there was this guy, he was basically Bob. He signed his this amazing, like, well formatted, brilliant story, Bob. And she had to hunt for this guy to find him. And you shouldn't get to that point where an editor is having to hunt you down to find you. Always make sure that your details are in the top corner so they can get back to you. It's all well and good, like, saying, oh, my name is Bob Smith, and then leaving it on there. But there are millions of Bob Smiths. How do you expect an editor? And they're not going to go out of their way, no matter how good the story is, unlike, obviously Angela's the exception, but they're not going to go out of their way to go, well, we need to find Bob Smith. This is a great story. They're going to go, well, they didn't seem to care enough to put the details on there, so why should we take it any further? Always make sure your details are there. Format is correct. Always look at your punctuation. If you're like me, I'm an absolute terrible person when it comes to grammar. That's why I use Grammarly as a backup plan. I do have an editor for a reason, because obviously I even though I was like a B in English literature and English at school, I dropped down a grade because of my punctuation and my grammar. That's very important. Do it to the best of your ability. If you're like me and you struggle, just do your best to make it better. Don't just throw out any story and then not give it a once over, at least to make sure that it's good for submission. Because if you forget to do that kind of grammar check, formatting, editor's just going to go, well, this is too much for me to do. Even the story's brilliant, but look at all these mistakes, all these grammar checks, the punctuation's wrong, the speech is all over the place. I don't know who's speaking from who because you haven't put this in. Again, they're going to write you off. So just do it to the best of your ability for submissions, and make sure that you always shun with your formatting unless publisher wants something different. But always check the guidance for that.
Thank you for that. Do you know one of the things that I actually use in Microsoft Word that's started up in is the read aloud function? Have you used that?
Love it. Absolutely love the read aloud function. The only problem is it doesn't punctuate for me. So I end up just going like, and I'm like, oh God, there needs to be a full stop. There needs to be a full stop. But I rabbit on forever with the read aloud. I find that easier. But again, because of my accent and it's an American program, it doesn't seem to pick up some of my words. So it's like, I'll look back and go, well, I didn't say that. That don't sound right.
I've got to admit, I use it, and once I've got a first draft finished, or when I'm through to a final draft, I can stick that computer there onto play, and it will read the manuscript to me whilst I'm on the elliptical machine there. And it's just, oh, I can get some exercise done, I can get this listened to, and then I keep having to pause when that somebody dropped something there because that was completely wrong. To you, what do the words literary success mean to you?
That's the thing, just reaching one person for me. It's making sure that you are known in the community as somebody that not just, throws out books and is always marketing their own stuff. It's all about the fact that you are willing to be part of that community. I love the crew I work with. I love Mothers of Mayhem. I love Godless. I love Get Writing Horror, because we all work together to put each other up. Literary success to me is, for me, this was literary success. Being able to be on a podcast talking about extreme horror, having my first short story on Godless was a big thing for me. And then it got better when I collaborated with Ash. And then it's getting better when I'm doing all the other projects I've got going. So I think for me, just having a book out there and knowing that I put all my hard work and all the horrible stuff that I've gone through finally makes sense, because I've got this in front of me, this paperback that I put all my blood, sweat and tears into. If just one person picks it up and leaves me a review and says, I love this book and I want more, that's it. That will make me happy. And if somebody comes to me and goes, I followed your advice on a YouTube video, and I bought this book, and it changed my perception of things. It helped me get over trauma. That'll be a literary success to me, because it means that I help put another author out there who should get more recognition than they are getting. I just want to help people. And for me, literary success isn't about money. It's about getting other people noticed, helping the community, and just one person pick up my book, look at it, read it, really take it in, and say to me, I loved it, and this character is who I related to, or this broke my heart, like Danny Volpe, like he broke my heart with Left to You. I was bawling for an entire night. That is a literary success to me. Somebody who can hit you so hard in the gut with emotion, with a story that stays with you. That's a literary success. That to me, anyway.
Completely agree. So you've got Your Move coming up. Is that released this month, or is it next month?
That's this month. I've got Your Move with Ash Outmore, 24th of this month on Godless. Then it releases on Amazon 27th. It's available for pre-order now.
Brilliant.
I'm also in an anthology for Black Ink called Heartless, where I do the foreword, and I've got 3 stories in there. It was my first foreword. I was so scared.
Well, what's daunting about writing a foreword?
For me, because I had to read, but thank God it was Drabbles, because 100-word stories, but there were so many of them that was so good and hit me hard. With a foreword, it's an introductory to the authors themselves. You're giving the reader the insight into what they've got to look forward to. Hello, forward. But it's all about research as well. Like for me, I did a lot of research into Valentine's Day. It's all about promoting as well in a forward. You really want to sell the stories. You want to push the authors into the spotlight and go, look, like Renita Parvat, she's doing this story. It's amazing. There's a story here that talks about honoring the mother-in-law. There's a story here where true love doesn't die. I was also talking about the fact that Valentine's Day stems back from different formats. So you've got one where it's a saint who married couples in secret. Another is that it was a saint that fell in love while he was imprisoned for it. Then you've got the Roman story, which is historically correct, about an emperor who actually murdered 2 men named Valentine's Day in the same month. So it was all about doing my research beforehand, before throwing them in and going, look at what you got to look forward to. So yeah, forwards are very intense, but I'd love to do another one, definitely. I think writing my own forward's going to be the worst part.
Is that your own forward for a collection of shorts, or is that for the novel?
Well, the Heartless one is out now.
Right.
They did give it away for free on ebook on Valentine's Day. It is £6 on Amazon at the moment. Right. But it's a collection of 100-word drabbles that have different meanings of Valentine's Day and love and all the snoppy, horrible teddy bears, flowers. They've gone. It is literally a horror anthology of brilliant collection of people. Dorian's in there, Tess is in there. It's full of great people. My actual novel was meant to be coming out last month, but because of personal reasons, I'm now having to push the deadline. So I'm just waiting on my editor to get back to me. I've said, I'm so sorry, but I can't do it this month. Can you push it back? So Death Walks With Me will be out in a couple of months, fingers crossed. Then I've got the podcast with Mothers of Mayhem. That's up now at the moment, discussing the art of extreme horror and its progression throughout the ages. So if you are a writer who wants to get into extreme horror, and you want to know the backlog, like all the history and the stories and throughout the years, how it has influenced people in writing, definitely check out the podcast. You've got Donna Latham, you've got Sonia Stack, you got Marina, me. We're talking all about movie influences, book influences. So Jack Ketchum, Stephen King, Clive Barker, loads of other names in there. How Godless has progressed into this evolution of extreme horror as well. So that's out now. I'm going to be
yeah, it's well worth checking out Mothers of Mayhem. It's so much fun. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I've also got I'm part of a Canada anthology called Out of Time. That's not sure when that's coming out. That's probably in like, I'm doing the edits in March. But that's my first Canada one, so I'm a little bit excited.
I'd be a lot excited about that. Yeah, you don't associate Canadians with horror, do you? Normally we sort of like think of them as. Yeah.
Well, this one it's a bit outside my box. It's true horror, so it's based on actual paranormal experience.
Right.
So I sent in basically what was it? It was a story about my grandfather in the old house.
Right.
From my own perspective. If you're not a believer, fair enough, just tune out. But I had so many strange experiences in my grandparents' old house, and I wrote about it and I submitted it, and they went, yeah, we'll take it. It's brilliant. So I was like, yay. So I get to put my granddad into a part of my writing, essentially, and he gets to be a part of me forever because he was a poet and he was published as well, and he was the one who encouraged me to write. So to have a story out there about his afterlife, so to speak, it really does mean so much to me that somebody took the story from my heart and put it into a book.
I completely get that. And yeah, on a slightly related note, do you think horror writers who write about the paranormal and the supernatural need to have some belief in those things? Or do you think it's that a writer will be able to distance themselves and go, well, I'm not really a believer, but here come the ghosties and ghoulies and hobgoblins and.
Well, it's like if we go to your story, for example, which you've got hiding behind your head, I see. There we go. Conversations with Dead Serial Killers. I mean, you look at the characters, Clive and stuff, and you just like, you do feel the emotion in it. Like, I've got a kind of thing that you're very science-based, but there is a little bit of kind of curiosity to you. So it's like two parts of you almost. But with paranormal and supernatural writing, I think it all depends, because you can always tell when somebody deeply believes in what they're writing, because you can feel the emotion when they're writing. Like, but when you're reading the story, you believe them because it's their belief. Whereas when somebody's writing something and it's supernatural or paranormal and it's make-believe, it's more of a them making you believe this exists, which I think is far worse. Like Bella Dean Joyner with her story Witch's Bargain. Oh my god, I had so many nightmares because of that story. It was the scene where she writes about the thing pressing its face against the glass of the door. I had nightmares for weeks about that. I know it's not real. I know it's not a real entity and it's fiction, but she made it real. So I think, no, you don't need to believe in the paranormal and supernatural. You just need to believe that you can make people believe, which is what she did really well with that. I've got Tyrant in my reading book at the moment. I'll be onto that at some point. I'm like, I'm gonna have more nightmares. It was the first time a book has ever given me nightmares. Usually it's horror movies because it's visual.
Yeah.
Books never seem to give me nightmares. Hers did, because it had atmosphere and it had emotion and it had a structure of eeriness that you felt like you were in the room walking around with the character. And you also kind of related to it in a sense of grief, like the guy just lost his wife and daughter in a car accident. So you were going along the journey with him and looking at the different stages of grief as well, which I thought was bloody fascinating, because she took aspects of grief that you don't usually look at. For example, you got the crying and stuff, but he stands in the funeral home and he just starts hysterically laughing out of nowhere. That happens. You do when you're in grief. You have wild outbursts. Nobody acknowledges it because it's an uncomfortable situation to be in, when somebody literally just goes into a manic episode because their brain's trying to wake them up to realize the truth. And it's just, it really did bring me back to it. When she talked about grief, obviously losing my grandmother, I was in the same situation. I just stand there and laugh at a fork for no reason. It's just part of my brain processing grief.
So that was Witch's Bargain?
Yep.
Who was
Witch's
that,
Bargain. Bella Dean Joyner. So it's Joyner.
Because I think if ever I've heard a good sales pitch for a book, I just heard a good sales pitch for a book, and yeah, that's like, yeah, I definitely want to read that one. Natalie,
that's the thing in it. With a reviewer, you have to be able to sell it exactly, and if you have passion for the book, then obviously somebody else will read it and they'll feel the same passion.
Absolutely. Natalie, thank you so much for your time. This has been so greatly appreciated. I know my students are going to get an awful lot out of this. Thank you.